There's a situation that I've encountered several times now when creating a site that has multiple columns or a sidebar like this. And the issue is that let's say I have two columns, like in this simple example here. I have the main content and then a sidebar. And notice I have this gray background for the sidebar. Now what happens if I want this gray background to extend all the way down to match the height of the content column, even if the content of the sidebar is not that long? Now there's no good way to do this in CSS. There's no way to extend the height of this element beyond its padding without specifying an explicit height. Now, because this content might be dynamic, it might change in length, I don't want to give it a specific height in pixels because I want it to size based on the content. So one way that this has been done traditionally is to fake this gray background by using an image. And what you might do is you might take an image that's as wide as this whole area and a single pixel high, and just have it be white across here and gray across here, and then you set that image to the background of the page and tile it vertically so that this gray is essentially faked out, that this area appears gray even though it's not part of the element, just because it's the background of the entire page. And while this works, it's kind of an ugly hack, and my new method for doing this is to use JavaScript using jQuery to actually equalize the heights of these two columns when the page loads. So let's see how that works. You can see here is the source for the page that we're looking at there. It's just two basic divs with a class of column each, and then the left one has ID left and the right one has ID right. And I put in some dummy content just to make sure that the sizes of the two columns are different to start. And then we have some basic CSS that makes the two columns float left so they appear side by side, and I have each one given an explicit width so that they appear with those dimensions. And you see the right has the background with this gray color applied to it. And what I want to do is make this gray sidebar extend to the height of this one when the page loads. But what happens if this gray sidebar here is actually longer than this content? Like, let's say I remove these two paragraphs. In this case, I don't want the sidebar to be set to the height of this one because that would truncate some of the content. So what we really want to do is we want to have the two columns equalized in height based on whichever one is taller. And this is how we're going to do that. We're going to load up the jQuery library. I load it from Google, and then we're going to write a little script. So if you're not familiar with jQuery, this is just a shorthand that says anything inside this function is going to be executed whenever the DOM is ready, so essentially when the page loads. What we're going to do here is we're going to select these two divs, the left and the right column, and we're going to figure out which one of them is taller, and then we're going to set the height to the tallest one for both of them. So the first thing we do is we start off with an empty variable called tallest. I'm going to set that to 0. So by default, our tallest column is 0. We don't know what the heights are yet. Then we're going to get a selector to grab the two columns. So what this is saying is select all elements on the page that have a class of column and store it in this variable called $columns to equalize. Then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the elements in there using this each function. So for each of those columns, in this case there's only two, but it could work with any number of columns, we're going to get the height of the current column. That's done with the keyword this. or get the height, and we're going to store it in a variable called this height. Then we're going to check if this height is greater than our currently cached tallest height. So by default it's 0, so the first one that it runs, this height is going to be taller than 0. And what happens if it is taller is we assign the variable tallest to be that new height. So let's say the first column is the tallest. It checks the left column, and it sees that the height of that is taller than 0. So it sets the new value of tallest to equal the height of that column. And when it checks the second column, it sees that the second column is not taller than that first column, so nothing happens. And in the reverse situation, if the second column is taller, then it will overwrite the first column when it gets to it. Okay, so now, after we finish this loop, we have in the variable tallest in pixels the height of the tallest column. Now what we want to do is we want to set the height of both of those columns to that tallest height. So we again use our saved selector, and we set its height to tallest. So now when we switch back, we see that it looks exactly the same. Now why is that? That's because, in this case, the sidebar is taller than this one, so we don't want this to be changed in size. It will essentially have no effect. But in the case where there's more content in the left column, like we had originally, let's copy this back, add a couple more paragraphs. Now we'll notice that the sidebar on the right has scaled down to the height of the left one. And this, in effect, creates our matching height columns.